Block Grant Coronavirus, CDBG CV, and the Local Capacity Building CBDO Certification Program, which is the Notice of Funds Available, the NOFA. Next slide. On the agenda that we have today, just to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we do ask that you all please mute your microphones if we have not gained that control already. The navigation of the audio visuals is going to be with Ebony Russell. The introductions and the overview of the CDBG CV CBDO NOFA release is going to be with myself, Alexandria Torres. I'm also going to be the point of contact for this NOFA and this funding. And then after that, we will be moving into our Q&A with Allison O'Calley. We're delighted to answer all your questions. The raised hands that you have about this NOFA. We do ask that you hold all your questions until our Q&A portion with Allison. We want to be mindful of everybody's time and appreciate all your patience and are pleased that you all could be joining us today. With the introductions, again, with the CDBG, CV, CBDO, NOFA that's being released today with DOH and DOLA. The introduction I want to go ahead and introduce is our CDBG team that we have. We have Allison O'Calley, which is our CDBG team manager.
Hello.
We have Ebony Russell, which is our CDBG asset manager.
Hello.
And then we also have myself, which is Alexandria Torres, and I am a CDBG asset manager with Division of Housing. Again, for any NOFA related questions, please contact me. My email is in the blue link below. Questions or concerns that you have, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So next slide. As we're going into this one, we're going to go ahead and announce the key dates, which is the application dates April 15th, 2023, on a rolling basis every month thereafter until all available funding is committed of the expiration date of the NOFA. That date is going to be May 31st, 2023, which the expiration date is subject to change. If that does happen to change, we will notify on our platforms the new date that will be taking place with this. And again, if you have any questions on that, feel free to reach me through email and I can clarify. Next slide, please. So the local community capacity building, which is CBDO, the amount available up for this is the $500,000 minimum capacity, $10,000 maximum capacity, $50,000. The eligible applicants are going to be non-entitlement governments. So this NOFA is to help enhance the capacity and the ability of local governments, housing developments, organization, rural areas, and also to carry out the community development and affordable housing activities that benefit low and moderate income families in person in rural areas. The award details on this one, the funding provided for this NOFA is going to be in a 12-month grant form that may be renewed on base and funding availability and the project performance. Next slide. So the background and overview of this NOFA, again, is the capacity building. The organization is to develop the capacity and the ability for community housing development organization, which is also known as CHDOs. The local governments and to carry out the community development and affordable housing activities. Again, it was established with the CARES Act that was signed into law March 27, 2020, which is the public law of 116-136. Next slide. So here we have our CDBG versus our CDBG CV. It's going to get a little mouthy between CDBG, CDBG CV, CBDO. So just if you guys need to clarify that, just put it in the chat and we could go ahead and repeat that for you. But this is a unique opportunity for DOLA and Division of Housing to assist non-entitlement communities statewide in need of increasing the capacity of local nonprofit housing partners with the desire to expand their work and include development of affordable housing. Using CDBG's CV funds is giving the opportunity to build stronger working relationship between nonprofit and housing and local government. With the CDBG CV HUD has increased the limit on the amount of funds that we can use to fund planning and capacity building activities. And DOLA has more money to use for capacity building than we are allowed with regular CDBG. And again, with that increased limit there, our goal with this is to also help CDBG, CV funds to help housing agencies become CBDOs and certified. Next slide. With the non-CBDOs and funds used in the housing projects cannot be used, let's see. So with what we have here is with the non-CBDOs and the CBDO, you guys are going to kind of see the versus with it. Let's see, CDBG funds can support new affordable housing with acquisition or tap fees. For example, the construction costs must be covered with other funds. With the CDBG funds used in housing projects, it cannot be used for vertical construction or related costs versus where when you're a CBDO, you can go ahead and use the funds for the vertical construction and related costs, which I just mentioned. Next slide. So the eligible funding activities with the CBDO certification applicants, with the applicant being a public entity, nonprofit organizations, or local public housing authorities requesting funds for procuring consultants. The consultants are to provide leadership and prepare for the CBDO certification. Again, the funds available through CDBG CV are only available to the applicants who are either a 501c3, nonprofit organizations, a governmental entity or housing authority, or affiliates with these agencies. Again, the Community Development Block Grant Program, CDBG, for uses non-entitlement areas only, as it is defined by HUD. This is the only funding source limited to non-entitlement areas. Next slide. So for your notice of intent to apply, which is known as your NOI, you must submit your NOI prior to submission. Please submit your NOI to myself, which I have my email address on there. The NOI needs to have the intended service area and the CBDO certification as well. Next slide. So the application and criteria, the application criteria checklist described in here and the instructions for submission will be published on the DOH NOFA website. This information will be maintained on DOLA's website and other program application materials for the duration of the CBDO Capacity Building Grant Program. Again, just 6 steps here of the criteria, kind of go ahead and paraphrase it down. It is also in the NOFA with details if you're needing to go ahead and reference to that as well. Next slide. Now, the application required contents is you're going to want to have proof of your commitment partnership for future projects from the local government, your proposal of concepts and potential location and activities for future projects, and your market study demonstrating the demand of increase for affordable housing stock and subject service areas for residents having to low, moderate, and median incomes. Next slide. In lieu of your market study, the substitutions may include the number of households on a wait list for your local public housing authority, including the application date, earliest application currently on the waiting list, your most recent purge date, the volume of your waiting list for your housing choice vouchers, including application date, earliest applicant currently on wait list, and your most recent purge date. Those are really important. And your housing needs assessment completed within the past 5 years. Next slide. So with the application, again, we also have our budget spreadsheets, which again, the links are on the website as well. The DOH program spreadsheet uses the CHOTO operating budget and the operating staff allocation tabs. And again, this is just a visual to give you guys a heads up of what to look for and how to fill out. We're anticipating the most likely applicants to be CBDO certified will be existing CHDO CHOTO's organizations underneath the home programs or potentially agencies who administer the revolving loan fund or RLF, such as the down payment assistance, the DPAs, single family owner occupied rehab. Those organizations who have been funded in the past should find this program spreadsheet very familiar. We're gonna, as in this example here, where it just breaks down, again, the staff allocation and what the budget should look like. Again, this is going to be the operating budget of the second part of the spreadsheet, the second tab that you'll have there. Again, we just kind of highlighted in blue where you could see as far as the consultant that you're going to have there, the total program costs, the state fund requirements, and how to go ahead and fill this out. Again, if you run into any troubles with it, go ahead and feel free to reach out beforehand of submission, and we'll go ahead and make sure that you guys understand thoroughly. Next slide. So your application submission, again, for the CBDO, must be submitted through the application portal link of our Neighborly. Again, we have the link there on the blue. Also below on the slide, you're going to see a picture that will show you in Neighborly of what to look for and what it looks like, but it's going to be underneath the CHDO application. Also, we have some Neighborly training videos on the DOH website that can walk you through the Neighborly software. And again, just a reminder for that application deadline is going to be May 31st, 2023. Again, if it's subject to change, and it does, we will go ahead and notify through our website that the deadline has been extended. Next slide. So you're probably already asking by now, what is the CBDO? So the CBDO is generally a nonprofit organization that undertakes specific kinds of CDBG funded activities. The CBDOs can be for profit or nonprofit organizations that can be governmental entities. Again, with those specialized activities that are going to be happening is the neighborhood revitalization. That project includes a sufficient size, scope, and have an impact of the decline of the geographic location within the jurisdiction. The community economic development, that project includes activities that increase economic opportunity, persons of low and moderate income, a clear need to address a lack of affordable housing, and the energy conservation, let's see, which the activities that address that for the benefit of the residents and the recipients of the jurisdiction. All use of the CDBG funds for construction-related costs might trigger Davis-Bacon. If it does, please be mindful of that. If it triggered it in the past, it'll probably trigger it now. For all construction-related expenses, it also might trigger Section 3, minority or women-owned business compliance as well. So just be mindful in putting that in the application as well. Next slide. To be CBDO certified, so the CBDO, which may not be an agency of local government, complies with the following restrictions. Let's see. The state or local government may not appoint more than 1/3 of the membership of the organization's governing body. The board members appointed by the state or local government may not in turn appoint the remaining 2/3 of the board members. And also no more than 1/3 of the governing board members are public officials, including any employees of the public jurisdiction. Next slide. Be there. So continued off of that, the CBDO is not required to revert its assets to the local government, which is the recipient of the CDBG funds, upon dissolution. A CBDO that does not qualify may also be determined to qualify as an eligible entity. If the recipient demonstrates to the satisfaction of HUD through the provision of the information regarding the organization's character and bylaws. Again, we went ahead and linked for the CFR there for the full regulation to take you to that for more resource. So the consultant's role is very important. They are going to be the ones that are going to go ahead and start the application process for you, making sure that you are CBDO certified and getting all of this together for you guys while they are working the project. For a consultant, a professional service outside of the agency that provides technical assistance for CDBO certification until your project is complete. Again, it's going to go ahead, the cost to fundraise for the staff position, the cost of board recruitment is going to go ahead and be in the outline of the budget in the NOFA as well. Next slide. Again, the program budget is intended for the consultants on the salary and the wages. The consultant also responsible, again, to fill out that spreadsheet for you guys, whether if it's an outside agency or if it's going to be someone inside the agency. Again, if they're having any questions, just go ahead and refer them to all of our resources, which we will have on our DOH website for the NOFA release, as well as the links that we have attached to this session as well. Next slide. So entitlement or non-entitlement community, which one are you? Which is the big question. Again, this funding source is for non-entitlement only. You could go ahead and look at the slide and see where you fall with that. HUD is the one that determines the entitlement, the annual funding allocation for the formula of that. And let's see, what else do I have there? They usually, when they go ahead and declare that, they are looking at it for the population, which is above or below the 50,000. Let's see. And next slide. And that is the end part of the presentation and slides. Again, we do have additional slides on here. That is going to be the definitions for the purpose of this NOFA. They're pretty much all in reference with the links and everything on it. We're now going to move on to our Q&A session with Allison O'Calley. She's going to be taking your questions from here. Again, we will go ahead and post all of this on our DOH website link where the NOFA posting is. And Allison, you ready?
I am, sure. And I think people, probably the smartest way to do this, if this works for everyone, if you're not able to unmute yourself, feel free to put your question in the chat. But if you have a question that you want to ask verbally, if you'll use the button on the bottom toolbar of the screen that's a little hand, that'll let you raise your hand, and then we can call on people in the order they raise their hand. And if no one has questions, that's okay too. I see, I think, Andrea Sokolowski, whose name I hope I didn't mispronounce, but it's possible. What can I answer?
Hi, yes, you pronounced my name correctly, thanks. So I'm sorry, I joined a little late, sorry about that. So my understanding is the CBDO is it basically replacing like the CHODO, and it looks like the board makeup in terms of like the low income is a little bit higher for this, so low to moderate. And what is the definition of moderate in terms of like AMI?
Oh, sure. So I'll start with the part about the CHODO. The reason we're using our CHODO application for this, and the reason that we think our most likely applicants will be organizations that are CHODOs under CHDOs, I apologize to folks, Community Housing Development Organization, which we'll call CHODO, are under the home program, are very similar in makeup is what the requirement is to be a community-based development organization under CDBG. So I kind of gently liken a CBDO to be very similar to a CHODO. While the state can use home funds in a variety of locations, and home funds can be used for vertical construction of housing, the state only administers the CDBG funds for the balance of state communities that are not entitlements. And we are not allowed to provide funding to organizations to use for vertical construction costs for development of housing, or for construction related expenses like construction finance, for example. And that we have found to be a difficult thing for the more rural communities to grapple with when they're looking for funding sources to use to put into housing construction costs when they want to develop new affordable housing. So we're taking advantage of the opportunity that CDBG CV allows us to spend more money on these planning and capacity building costs to help housing organizations who may be really close to meeting the requirements of being a CBDO already get to the point where they can be certified as such, because then they can apply. Well, a local government would still need to apply to us and be the grant recipient, but then when they pass the funds on to that housing authority or nonprofit, for example, that organization can use those funds for construction costs, which normally we're just not allowed to do. So what we're trying to do is make it possible to use CDBG in more rural areas in a more similar way to how we can use home funds, to make it easier to help those less populous communities develop more affordable housing. So CDBG itself requires that a minimum of 70% of the funds we use from our whole grant serve LMI populations, which is low to moderate income, which I think is the second thing you asked about. And that just means households whose income is at or below 80% of the area median income, and area being defined however HUD defines it. That may be a county, it may be a municipality, it may be a multiple county area. And so the board makeup for that, where we talk about a specific percentage of the board members either having to be at or below 80% of the area median income, would be another example. It's similar to, in order to be certified as a CHODO, where a portion of the board needs to represent that low to moderate income population. The same thing applies for a CBDO, that similar requirement. And then I feel like I sidetracked from the third part of your question. So if I missed part of that, let me know what part I didn't quite answer.
I guess, well, I just have one additional question. So is it an either or? Is it a nonprofit organization would either apply to the CBDO or the CHODO? Or could you apply to both?
I'm glad you asked for that. An organization can absolutely be certified as both or as only one or the other. If you're certified as a CHODO, that affords you that status under the home program only, and it only affords you the benefits of being a CHODO under that funding source. CHODO has no applicability to the CBD or the CDBG program. Likewise, being certified as a CBDO is specific to that CDBG funding program. So you can do very similar activities, but to be clear, if you apply to be a CBDO, or if you apply for this to get certified as a CBDO, our intention is so that you can get certified as a CBDO and be able to apply for and use CDBG funds for housing construction costs, and also to not have to treat the revenue generated from those activities as program income, because that's not a requirement. And so hopefully this allows both the state to provide funding in a way, and for local governments and nonprofits and housing authorities to use CDBG in a way that we typically can't do, in a way that you're more commonly able to do with home funds. So we're just trying to make that possibility more prolific, basically. Does that help answer that?
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. I think, am I right?
Yvonne was next, I believe.
Thank you. Hi, it's been a while since we've talked.
There are a
Hi,
few
this
questions
is
in the chat.
Yvonne from Brothers.
Hi.
Good to see you, Allison. It has been a while.
Right?
I have a couple questions and I'm slightly confused. And I feel like you did answer this, it's just me. So my first question is, first slide, it was very clear. Only non-entitlement communities can apply for this funding, correct?
I would say the local government has to, and the area in which work would be done does have to be a non-entitlement. That said, if, and we'll use Brothers Redevelopment as an example, Brothers obviously works in a variety of locations in the state. If you want to apply for assistance to help become certified as a CBDO, you'll need to designate specific counties or municipalities in which you would conduct your CBDO activities in order to get certified. And you do have to define that area. All of those areas would have to be non-entitlement areas. To be clear, that is only the requirement for this funding, and for the state to be able to provide funding out of CDBG to non-entitlement local governments that they might want to pass through to you for projects down the road. If you want to become certified as a CBDO and to work with entitlement areas as well, there's no prohibition on doing that. It's just important to identify that that would be something that would be a separate certification that you would do with that local government. So if you want to become certified, for example, through this program to work in, I'm just going to say roughly, like, let's say the southwest corner of the state, that would be largely appropriate as a designated area, keeping you in non-entitlement areas for the certification that the state would help certify you in partnership with those local governments. Separately, with the same documentation that you would put together in board makeup, et cetera, you could provide that same documentation, for example, to the city of Denver, and they could certify you as a CBDO to do those activities in Denver. But those two certifications have to be separate, and you obviously apply to different entities for funding, but you definitely would have two different CBDO certifications in order to work in those different areas. Does that clarify that better?
No, but I understand the point that you're making.
Okay.
So I understand it's very similar to a CHOTO, and you
Yes.
designate this specific area. And if we wanted to work in Southeast and we're moving around, we need to be designated as a CBDO in those other areas. So that's what you answered for me. This is my question.
Okay.
Can we apply for this funding? Can Brothers apply for this funding, or are we going to a government and having them apply?
Oh, okay. You can do it either way.
Okay.
The reason we talked about, the reason we talked about that this is a unique opportunity for the state with the CDBG CV funds is because with CDBG CV, we have a higher cap on how much funding we can spend on planning and capacity building activities. So we're using this funding source to fund what is capacity building and planning activity with this money to help do the CBDO certification. That once that's completed, we would be using regular CDBG to fund potential activities you would do. The local governments would absolutely have to apply to us for CDBG funds that they would pass through to you for a project that you were planning to develop. But you can either apply to us directly as a nonprofit for these funds to do the capacity building, hiring the consultant to become a CBDO, or you can have a local government apply on your behalf. Either is fine. If you apply to us directly, you need to identify which local governments that are non-entitlement local governments you anticipate partnering with down the road to do projects that would use CDBG funds, because they would need to apply to us and pass the money through to you, and they would have to act the grantee for compliance because that's a CDBG requirement. So regardless of whether you apply to us or a local government does, either way, you need to have confirmed with those local governments that by becoming a CBDO, they would be interested in potentially applying to us for funds to help pass through to you to do projects in their jurisdiction, because we'd be kind of co-certifying you as a CBDO with them. And that's why we talk about wanting to help you build that partnership. Yeah.
You answered my question there, but just two quick questions. So we do have a partner. Is there a timeline that this project needs to happen? Because this one has been in our pipeline for a while. Do you have this timing of the project that needs to happen?
So this is one thing that differs from the CHOTO program. Once you get certified as a CBDO, the expectation is that that certification is tied to a particular project you plan to do. So we've kind of taken this kind of as a multi-phased thing. This funding right now is available to help organizations have the assistance to put together what they need to do to become a CBDO. Anytime an entity that is eligible to be a CBDO has a local government apply to the state on their behalf for funds for a specific project they want to develop, and they would like to use CDBG funds for construction costs, or to not have to worry about there being such a thing as program income, that application to the state needs to come with proof that that entity is eligible as a CBDO, and we need to put in the file for that particular project funding contract, CBDO certification for that particular organization for that project. So if you're going to do, let's say, 4 different projects over a 10-year period that might use CDBG funds from the state, each time you just need to provide any updated information about your board roster, for example, to recertify as a CBDO, to make sure that you use CBDO status for that particular project. So that part is gently similar to being a CHOTO. The difference here is that there's no time frame in which, once you become a CBDO, you have to have done a project using CDBG funds afterwards. Whereas for CHOTO operating, you obviously have to have a project in your pipeline and develop within a certain period of time. We're trying to help make it possible to use CDBG funds in a more productive way in rural areas by helping organizations be able to be certified, in hopes that that project that's been in their pipeline that just didn't have a reasonable construction funding source will be possible once they can be certified as a CBDO. And then the next project down the road, just provide updated documentation to recertify as a CBDO for that CDBG funded project. Does that really answers more than what you asked, but hopefully
but it answered my question, and it answered other questions. So this is my last question, I promise. So Brothers is a CHOTO right now, and I think the move to become a CBDO is fairly simple. And I heard you and Alexandria mention that these funds would be used to help the nonprofit get to this point where they could become a CBDO. So we don't need that help. How else can we use these funds, or is this not a good source if we're not using it that way? Like, we don't need a consultant to help us. So what kind of capacity building activities? Can you give me examples of what is eligible?
Okay, so we set aside a chunk of this CDBG CV money explicitly to fund hiring consultants to help organizations that don't have the staff capacity to go through that work to become eligible as a CBDO, so that they can pay for someone else to help them do that for them. I think you will have seen in the budget example that we showed in the slides, we listed, a couple $1,000s for potentially recording documents, because some organizations may need to update their bylaws or their articles of incorporation to articulate what their board makeup needs to be with their nonprofit status before they can change their board structure to be compliant with what a CBDO requires. So for example, those costs are related to it. You'd hire the consultant to do that work. They might budget separately for legal funds, or the consultant might say it's going to cost you this much, including I'll do all of that legal paperwork for you. So that's why we listed those separately as examples of those being eligible costs. We don't anticipate we didn't intend for this money to fund a staff position, for example, for an organization to hire a person whose job it would be to make the entity eligible to be a CBDO and then go on to do projects. Our hope is that this consultant will help the organization become eligible as a CBDO and, you know, apply for that CBDO status, but also to help that organization fundraise and do the organizational development necessary if they don't have a development person on their staff, so that they can continue doing that kind of work in the future without needing to potentially apply for capacity building money. So the intention is specifically for this purpose. If you wanted to apply for capacity building money for some other purpose, that is not what this grant fund is for.
Got it. Thank you so much, Allison. Good to see you.
Likewise, hopefully you got me to answer a lot of other people's questions. I think the next person is Steve. How are you, Steve?
Oh, there were actually the questions in the chat first.
I apologize.
Yeah,
okay.
They've been waiting.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I see, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to read these out loud. I don't see anyone on the phone, but I don't want to assume everybody can read the chat. So Sean Von Rowan, I apologize if I just mispronounced your name. I'm a newer board member for our local public housing authority in Meeker, where we're in need of grant funds for significant infrastructure improvements. Would this opportunity be available to us? Not sure if we're a CHOTO organization or not. So two things. If the infrastructure improvements you have in mind are specific to an existing residential property, you don't need to become certified as a CBDO, because rehabilitation is an eligible cost under CDBG anyway. However, if the infrastructure improvements you have in mind are on a site that your housing authority already owns, I'm going to try not to get in the weeds here. CDBG funds can be used for infrastructure costs, but they can only be used to fund infrastructure if that property is owned publicly. So it would have to be owned by the local government, unless that housing authority is under the auspices of the local government. That would be okay. But for infrastructure costs, the nonprofit or the housing authority that's not part of the local government wouldn't be eligible to use CDBG funds for those costs, regardless of whether you were certified as a CBDO or not. So maybe if I didn't answer that in the way you were looking for, that might need to become an offline conversation that might not be about this funding opportunity or about being a community-based development organization. And we can, if you're the housing authority in Meeker, I think we can have somebody check side to find out if you're a CHOTO. I would guess if you're not under the impression you're a CHOTO, it's unlikely that you probably are one. Does that get close to what you were looking for, Sean?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Allison. I would maybe just like to set up an offline phone call with yourself or Alexandra to discuss.
Sure.
It's a little bit new territory for me, but I'm sure there's some mechanisms out there that we could take a look at.
Perfect. So Alsing Kilgore, who manages our federal housing asset management team, just put in the chat that Meeker is not a CHOTO through the Division of Housing. It's possible you are with another local government. And I think that sounds like a good idea. If you want to put your email address in the chat, that way Alexandria can reach out to you to coordinate a conversation. I think that probably sounds like a good idea.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thank you. And then Isabel Naring asked, are nonprofits allowed to submit applications on their own, or do they need to have a government partner? I think I answered this when I was responding to Yvonne, but if I didn't clarify that, Isabel, let me know and I can go into that more.
I think you did answer that. I have a follow-up question to that. So a lot of the things that you already mentioned about becoming a CBDO, we're already a CHEDO. And it sounds like we've already got some of those things in place, like updating our bylaws and stuff. How do we become a CBDO, whatever the acronym is, without, like, if we don't need the consultant, how do we become one?
If you don't need a consultant, then in that case, the incentive to become certified as a CBDO, if you already meet all that criteria, I would say, I don't know that there's a benefit to applying to us to get certified as a CBDO is a higher priority than having a project that you want to do where it would benefit you to have CBDO status when you get funded. So if you have a project in mind and you would like to use CDBG funds for construction, or you know it might generate revenue that you would prefer not be considered program income and potentially have to repay funds to us or use it in that program income qualified purpose. In that case, when you ask that local government to apply to us for funds on your behalf, you would want to include in your application for funding for that project an indication that you would like to be certified as a CBDO for the purposes of that project, and provide us with your application the documentation for that, so we certify you in conjunction with reviewing that project application. I don't see, if you're not already eligible to be a CBDO, this program now is a good fit to take advantage of the opportunity to get help to get ready to be a CBDO. But if you already meet that criteria, what you're going to want to do is have a project in mind and then kind of tie that in together so we certify you for that particular project.
Okay, thank you. Is there a place online that we can see the eligibility requirements?
Yes, that in the NOFA document itself, we list those, and we also have hyperlinked in it the citation that goes directly to the gigantic long Housing and Community Development Act section that articulates what it takes to qualify as a CBDO.
Okay, thank you.
And Steve, did that answer your question, or did you have a different one?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I had a couple of quick other questions. Back when Bill Simpson was around, I believe we had become a CBDO, but I don't recall if there's like a recertification process or something. So if this is applicable to us, we'd like to do that. But my question is this: since we cover such a large area, we are already talking with one county and then a city within a whole different county. Would we need two different applications and two different housing needs assessments, or how does that work? And maybe that's just something we talk about offline. And then the logistics of this are just a little confusing to me. So we would do the NOFA, the NOI, and the application is to request funding for a consultant, right? But we already have to have our housing needs assessment prior to the request for the consultant, if I'm understanding correctly.
So let me start with your first thing. I think you are probably correct that maybe when I first met you, you might have been certified as a CBDO for some reason or another. If you were there then and you just haven't used it since, I would say probably the best use of your time is to read the criteria to become a CBDO, or of what a CBDO is. If you know you meet that already, I don't know that this application is serve the purpose for you. However, if that's not the case, if you read it and you say, oh, we don't have these two things, and my goodness, that's going to take 30 hours of time with a lawyer doing document stuff, that's what this is for sure.
Sure. I think we must be, because we actually modified our bylaws. So
that's, I feel like I remember that happening. So that said, you probably don't need to apply for this. What I can answer the question, I will answer the question. If let's say you're talking to County A and you're talking to Municipality B that's in separate County B, but not that county, If those two governments don't work together to provide programs, and you want to do projects in both of those areas that might use CDBG funds, then I would say if you plan to do a project in County A, you would want to be certified as a CBDO to serve that area. And also, to do a project in municipality B, you need to be certified as a CBDO with that local government, because the entity, so municipality B and county A would both potentially apply to the state for CDBG funds for projects they plan to pass money through to Total Concept to do. If that's the case, each of those projects, we just need to see the CBDO certification or the CBDO documentation, so you can be certified as a CBDO in order for you to be able to use the funds in that way for each of those separate projects. Could you potentially ask those two governments plus the county that municipality B is located in, if together they would like to all certify you as a CBDO, and that is your service area? That's plausible. That just have to be, worked out as minutia between the various governments.
Okay. Thanks, Allison. Good to see you.
Anybody else have questions or comments are also allowed? And also, Alexandria and Ebony, is there anything that anybody asked that you think I didn't speak to well that would be helpful to everyone for me to talk about more, or anything either of you want to add too?
Again, just when you guys do apply, we ask on the application that you apply for one project. If you have a couple that are in mind and you want to see if they're eligible for it, go ahead and do an application per project. Just a reminder on that.
Andrea.
So I thought I had it, and then Alexandria just said the project thing. So we're applying for a consultant, but it has to be tied to a project.
If your organization has a project in mind that you'd like to do, but you haven't moved forward on it, because how the heck are you going to pay for construction when tax credits aren't really a thing in your community? Steve, I'm looking at you. And you know that, gosh, if we were certified as a CBDO and we could use CDBG funds for construction costs and that would solve our problem, that would be the project Alexandria is talking about. Can you apply to us for funds to help you get certified as a CBDO and you don't have a project in mind, but there's something you've been planning on doing, or the local government has done a housing needs assessment? Oh, that's the thing Steve asked that I left out. They've done a housing needs assessment. They know, everyone knows there's a need for housing, but the way of making it happen is stuck because there's not enough money for construction. That would be the example of, it's not a project yet, but it's something that you need to do. And becoming certified as a CBDO helps you move forward with that. That's why we kind of gave a list of, if you don't have a market study, you could have this or that. We want to make sure that the organizations who have the potential to become a CBDO aren't held back by not having just done a market study, not having just done a housing needs assessment, because it's entirely possible that's something your organization wants to grow into doing, but hasn't had the capacity to do that kind of research to get started. Our hope is this can help get your organization to have the amount of capacity to be able to do those things. And that's why we said, if you're a housing authority that doesn't currently develop, but you have existing vouchers and there's a backlog of applications, and building more units would help with that. We're trying to give you a lot of options to demonstrate you have a project in mind without you having to say, we bought this piece of land and the only thing we're missing is construction money to build on it. Does that help?
Yes. Do you all have like a list of qualified consultants to do this type of work? I mean, I can think of a number of consultants in general in the construction world, but not necessarily a consultant that knows how to get us to a CBDO status.
We do not, and we're open to assisting with helping you you could potentially apply for funds and include, we put in the budget for the cost for a consultant, and it's also going to cost us, I don't know, this much money to put out an RFP to find a consultant. You could put in costs for that because we want to help you find the right consultant. If you, it could be a lawyer, it could be somebody who helps, who is a development specialist who helps nonprofits and housing authorities put together their funding application to apply for tax credits, for example. I think who might be able to do this could be a variety of different kinds of entities. It could be that you have a retired board member that you hire on as a consultant who's very familiar with the organization and its bylaws, who would like to come out of retirement and do a certain amount of work to help you do that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a consultant who specializes in this.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody have any other questions? I'll leave it to Alexandria.
I'm double checking the chat, making sure we did not miss anybody else. Again, if you guys want to have offline conversations, we are up for that. Just put your email address in the chat. I will go ahead and grab that. Sean, I already got yours, and we'll go ahead and get something set up for that. If there is no other questions or concerns, then we'll go ahead and end our session for today. Again, we're going to be posting this on the DOH website. If you happen to come in late and you caught it in the middle, the recorded session will be there as well. And again, the definitions for the NOFA will be posted on the ends of the slides that will have the links and everything there to explain more for detail. We thank you again today for joining us for your lunch hour, and we will give you 2 minutes back to go ahead and head off for lunch. Have a great weekend. And again, feel free to reach out with any questions. Have a great day, everybody.